Memento Moris have always been an iconic staple of DbD. However, because nobody used the offerings outside of a new character's release, this was barely seen in your matches. Now that the finisher Mori is out, the value of Memento Mori animations has skyrocketed. So, let's take a look at all of them once again to see which killers would benefit from new animations and which ones are perfect as is. And just like in most killer tier lists, the Trapper begins this video with the most outdated and basic Memento Mori ever, and it makes sense, considering he was one of the first characters created for the game. It's just a basic massage on the back of the survivors, nothing too crazy or cinematic about it. The Pig's Mori is super quick and efficient, and it's also a reference to how Detective Tapp was dealt with in the original Saw film. However, it's way too basic for a chapter that comes from one of the most gruesome licenses in movie history. There is no use of unique traps like the shotgun trap or even a tampered reverse bear trap. It's just way too basic and human. When you think of a character using a chainsaw, you expect its finisher to be something brutal, but the end result is just a basic swipe on the back that you literally do constantly during the match. I have seen various back shots, but this one is not anything out of this world, and I still think if Hillbilly lifted the survivors on his chainsaw during the Mori, it would look significantly better. The Wraith is, in my opinion, the best out of the original 3 killers, even if his Mori is very similar to the Trapper. The difference here is that I love the touch of grabbing the survivors' legs in order to pull them closer. Doing this finisher close to the hatch or in the exit gates makes it even better, but it's still super basic and not representative of who the Wraith is. The Skull Merchant's Mori is, in my opinion, the actual worst one if we consider how new this character is compared to the previous 4. However, it is still carried by the animation abilities of the artists. I hate the fact that the survivor just stands up during the Mori and they act as if the Skull Merchant is not there, when in context it makes no sense since you will activate this Mori after downing a survivor. So why do they suddenly get the Oblivious status effect as well as Unbreakable? And then we have the drone, which is there just to remind you this killer has drones as their power, because it does absolutely nothing and it adds nothing to the animation itself. Even in the end, the drone scans the survivors for absolutely no reason. It's a really disappointing Mori for a killer that has been shown to have some brutal executions in the lore. The Twins is the first character that has 2 actual Mori animations, one with Victor and another one without him, and to be fair, both are boring. It's the classic hits on the back, very similar to the classic Mori animations, but it is better animated and there is some weight to it, which adds a bit of punch. But other than that, this is probably one of the most generic animations there is. I do love how in the Victor version, Victor asks Charlotte permission in order to bite the survivors, which adds a bit of flair. But besides that, what Victor actually does is not as hurtful in my opinion as literally any other Mori animation on this list. If there is one thing that the Freddy we work will not fix on this January, it's his boring Mori. Now don't get me wrong, it's a cool Mori in terms of camera work, and it's also a cool reference to how one of the characters dies in the remake Nightmare on Elm Street movie, as it's an exact copy. But would you say this is one of his most iconic kills? In my opinion, it doesn't even come close. Freddy is a magic character that could do crazy stuff with his power, and all he does is a classic Dio Brando donut. In terms of uniqueness, this is a high contender, as it was the first Mori ever where the killer actually speaks, and it's also a unique concept as the survivors get drowned on the plague's puke, which I am sure some of you freaks would enjoy. My issue with this Mori is that there is not enough time for a survivor to actually die from this, and the ending feels rushed. The sassy backslap to throw them away is cool, but not enough. Check out her DbD mobile Moris and you can clearly see that the one we have is the worst in my personal opinion. I have never been a fan of the Blight's Mori, especially how awkward it looks compared to the rest. A character that can inject stuff to you sounds like a very scary concept for a finisher, but all you get with the Blight is a weird bubble that he pops, which to be completely honest, doesn't look even painful. We have seen what crazy stuff the Putrid Serum can do on other characters, So why is it so disappointing on the Mori? The start of Pyramid Head's Mori is absolutely fantastic, as it's a reference to how James could die in the original Silent Hill 2. It's also cool to see the power of Silent Hill being used in order to hold the survivors with the metal wires. However, my big issue comes with the twist that he does after stabbing the sword. I said it once, and I still think the same. It just looks unnatural and not in a good Silent Hill way. The Final Judgement of Pyramid Head shows how heavy and annoying the sword is to wield, and even Silent Hill 2 Remake did a great job at showing how heavy the sword is. But in this Mori, suddenly the sword feels like paper as it clips through the survivor with such a swift movement. And just like Pyramid Head's Mori, Leatherface also suffers from the fact that the game does not have any dismemberment on it, and so despite the concept being cool, it looks awkward in game. The Mori animation in itself is pretty basic and not that original, but it's the beginning and the end what elevates this Mori, as I love the hammer hit to the head to disorient survivors as well as the victory chant at the end, and for that reason I rank it a bit higher despite it being so old. Out of all the classic Moris of just using your basic weapon on the survivors, I think the Huntress has a really good one, and I think it's mainly because of how creepy it looks with the survivors struggling to move after the first hit. This would be a decent default Mori for the Huntress, but since it's currently the only one she has, when compared individually with the rest, it's not that big of a deal. Like I said with Skull Merchant, I dislike when survivors randomly stand up at the beginning of the animation, and this also happens on this one. The starting stab is decent, along with the spirit's facial animations and sounds which show she's filled with rage. But besides that, this is the classic hit them in the back a couple of times Mori, with the only thing putting her a bit higher being the fact that this Mori could be a reference to how she died. This position might surprise a lot of you, but I actually think that Myers needs a touch up on how his animations are in order to fit with the current days. Don't get me wrong, the cinematics and the actions itself, like the survivor trying to defend themselves, are amazing and a really cool reference to the original Halloween film. However, I cannot be the only one that sees how this Mori is animated poorly compared to the newer, smoother animations. It feels like something from 2016, it's clunky, there are clipping issues, and that's why it's ranked so low. If they do make this animation smoother, I also hope that they add a head tilt at some point on this Mori. The Nemesis, just like Freddy Krueger, has a Memento Mori that is taken straight from the source material. In this case, this animation is exactly the same as one of the possible deaths that Jill Valentine can have during Resident Evil 3 Remake. It's cool, and I love the touch of Nemesis screaming stars when you Mori a STARS member. However, compared to the other Headstone mementos, this one is basic. There is an impact, but the fact that we cannot see it and it's implied hurts the Mori in my personal opinion. Despite being so old, the Doctor's Mori is really original all things considered, as he will completely fry your brains with electricity to the point your face will end up smoking. I also love the close-up to the survivor's face, but this close-up is also the biggest weakness of the Mori, as it truly showcases how basic and outdated DbD's graphics are, and it reminds you that this game came out in 2016 with a small budget. The faces of the survivors are intact, and when you compare this with the newer Moris, it's clear to see that this one is old. The nurse was the first Mori behavior worked on that was actually something new outside of slashing the survivors in the back. She is also one of the only killers that does not use her weapon at all, as instead, she uses her telekinetic powers to lift the survivors and choke them, which I am sure many of you would love to be in this position. Despite me thinking it's really cool and loving the detail of the nurse gently closing the survivor's eyes, the animations are very old, and in fact, the survivor's eyes do not close, making this Mori animation look like a cheap mobile game, which is funny considering the animations on DbD Mobile are actually really decent. The clown is the second head stomper on this vid, but the very first with this animation, and in fact originally it was so bad that the devs had to add a crunch sound effect at the end to increase the impact of the stomps. However, The actual interesting part is the end, which in my personal opinion is one of the most disgusting things a killer has done in DbD. This was the very first Memento Mori with actual amputation, so for its time it was actually quite good, which shows how better the Mori quality has increased over the years. And we finally arrive at the very first cosmetic Mori we have in the game, and that is the Were-Elk for the Huntress. Overall, in terms of cinematics and animations, it's an improvement compared to the Huntress, and I especially love that one scene where it looks like someone is filming on a camera. The guts appearing on the horns of the Were-Elk also add a bit of brutal effect to this finisher, but my issue with it is that they disappear during the Mori animation, which in my opinion cheapens the effect a lot and is something that does not happen with other Mori similar to it. There is also a lot of downtime between each scene, unlike in the original Huntress Mori. For the price, it's good, but overall, it could be better. It is fitting for the Trickster to have good choreography during his Mori, since he had to dance a lot during his performances, and that's how this Mori feels. It's like a private performance, a finale for the survivors, where he is so full of ego that he even throws an autographed photograph to the survivor, which can be interpreted as either him being so narcissistic he thinks the survivors would appreciate it, or as a memento to know that it was him who did it for anyone that finds the corpse. However, the only thing I don't like is that what happens during the Mori is just one hell state of what happens during the entire match. The Houndmaster debuts this ranking with having the best head stomp Mori out of all three of them. First of all, we have a bit of dog action going on, and I love how Snug stops the moment she commands him, showing how disciplined he is. Then we have an insult from the Houndmaster depending on who the survivors are, which is a first for an original character, and she even has a line for Nicolas Cage too. And finally, we have the most brutal stomp out of all of them. This is what I wanted to see from Nemesis. Overall, it's a great Mori, but nothing groundbreaking. The Deathslinger might have one of the funniest and most disrespectful Moris despite being a serious character, and it's also one of the most original uses of a killer's power I have seen. Instead of using it to shoot a survivor from afar, he uses the rifle to impale the survivors and then have the harpoon come out of their mouths. It makes no anatomical sense, the devs and animators knew this fact, and yet they still decided to go for it, which is what makes it so good. I also love the sound effects survivors do after they get the harpoon. Despite there being so many killers in the roster, some of them not even human, there is only one character in the entire game that has an animalistic Mori, and that is the Demogorgon. There is no playing with their food or disrespecting them like the rest of characters. The Demogorgon is efficient and brutal, swinging the head of the survivors in order to kill them as soon as possible, just like a wild dog would do, and the muffled sound of their screams adds so much to it. This is the only Mori that feels like a primitive killer is doing it for instinct, not for bloodlust, and I love it for that. And surprisingly, the Unknown is another killer that I fully expected to have a primitive Mori, but this one is super creepy. I love how it starts with crawling instead of lifting the survivors, and also how the Unknown doesn't use its weapon. Then, we also see how some tentacles sprout from the Unknown's back in order to suck the survivor inside them, which is better seen in third person. We don't know what it did to them or how it even works, which adds to the mystery, and also the voice lines are really cool. Talking about slow but efficient, we have the Singularity, another killer that can talk to survivors during their Mori, and I love how this Mori is so straight up and brutal at the same time. This shows that Singularity still operates as a robot. First of all, he picks the survivor up, tells them that it will be over soon and it might be painless, and then he injects them with an acid or some very lethal liquid. And let me tell you, that face shot at the end of the Mori surprised a lot of us back when we first saw it. In terms of comedic value, Chucky takes the cake with the most fun Memento Mori in terms of animations. The fact that he takes out random stuff from behind him as if this was a cartoon from the 90s is really funny. It's also filled with references to iconic kills in the Child's Play movies, and it comes with a special voice line that is also different if you use Tiffany. Out of all backshot Moris, where the survivors just get stabbed repeatedly, this one, in my opinion, is the best. Just like the Unknown, the Dredge Mori gives us more questions than solutions, and it's the first Mori on this video where we actually don't know if the survivor ends up dead at the end, because based on the animation, they are still screaming while being taken into the void. I also love how the camera is darkened for this Mori, to simulate us being in nightfall. The only thing I don't understand is where did the Dredge got a bunch of kitchen knives and screwdrivers from, and why would it keep it inside its body? I have seen a lot of people hating on this Memento Mori, and to that, all I have to say is that you guys have zero idea of who Dracula from Castlevania is, because this Mori is absolutely perfect. It's a reference to one of the most iconic scenes in the games, combined with the absolute disrespect of treating the survivor like absolute trash. He cuts the survivor's neck, spills some of their liquid to the ground, showing how worthless it is and how he is in no rush to not waste it, drinks it on a summoned wine glass, and then he does the iconic throw just about as survivor goes down. It's classy, and it's very disrespectful. Isn't it funny how a character from a video game made for children above 12 years old has one of the most brutal Moris that is even better than some of the most iconic killers in horror media? Naughty Bear first arrived to absolutely clear the Trapper in terms of Memento Mori quality, completely stealing the idea of using the bear traps as part of the animation. It's the extra touches of personality, like the narrator saying his line at the start, or Naughty laughing at the survivor and then doing the iconic boo at the end, which elevate this Memento from a joke to actually being really cool and worth the price of the cosmetic itself. And talking about iconic horror movies, we have potentially one of the most iconic horror monsters combined with another iconic horror movie shot. This animation feels like it came straight from the movies instead of just being an animation of a video game, because it is, as it's a reference to how Brett died in the original film. What I love about this is that despite the Xenomorph being an alien creature, the death is extremely quick compared to the rest of survivors, showing that it does not care about the misery of the survivors itself, it just wants to end its job fast and as efficient as possible. I have praised this Memento Mori in my original ranking video as the only one from this entire vid that I actually think is realistic, and I still think the same way. While the vast majority of mementos feel like a video game or too fantastic to be a thing, this one actually feels like two people of the same strength fighting each other for life, and eventually the survivor being overpowered by the knife. I would love if more Memento Moris actually showed the survivors trying to escape and fight the killers on their last moments, something the Pig's Memento Mori should have done better. And talking about the survivors fighting back, we now have the only Memento Mori where they actually hurt the killer, as the survivors will lift themselves up just to punch Wesker in the face and remove his glasses. But this only makes him look more evil as it reveals his Ouroboros infected eyes. The actual kill animation itself is also a reference to Excella's fate in Resident Evil 5, so it gets bonus points for that. The only thing I personally dislike about this Mori is that it fits perfectly with a lot of survivors like Jill or Lara Croft, but it doesn't fit well with characters like Dwight or Claudette, as I don't think they would actually have the guts to punch the killer. What happens when you add brutality with rage and a bit of lore accuracy? We end up having the Oni's Mori, one of the most brutal out of all of them. This samurai absolutely hates when someone calls him the Oni, and guess what all of the survivors do when they play against him? That's why he will rip their tongue so they cannot say that name again, and finally end them up with the Cannibal in a really cool manner. This Mori also gets extra points anytime you use it while in Blood Fury, as it makes the Oni look even more enraged. The artist has potentially one of the most underrated Mori animations out of all killers in Dead by Daylight, which makes sense considering that nobody plays her, so they don't know how cool it is. but when you take a look at it and remember what it was, it's actually one of the flashiest animations in the game, which is fitting for an artistic character. She injects a crow inside the survivor's mouth just like Smoke or Noob Saibot from Mortal Kombat would do, and then it bursts from inside like an alien chest burster, all ending on a murder of crows eating the rest. They absolutely cooked when making this. The Hag is the very first Mori that actually changed the way future mementos would be made, and the first one that elevated the bar on violence by quite a high amount. The devs intentionally made this Mori extra spicy to show how much the Hag had suffered while alive. Every single veteran will remember the first time we saw this animation, and we all know that to this day it still holds up pretty well, with the only change I would personally make is maybe increase the quality of the organs because they look very low textured. The Hellraiser films have some very cruel scenes on the movies, and the Memento Mori represents it very well. It not only shows the magic powers of the Cenobites being able to chain the survivors and also stretch the skin of their face, the Cenobite also says his iconic line and transports the survivors to another plane. So what happens to them? Do they actually go and get tortured by Cenobites for eternity, or does the entity reset them back to the campfire? Either way, the end result is crazy, and it's cool seeing a Mori that doesn't actually kill survivors on the spot, just like the Dredge. Just like the Cenobite, notice how the strongest killers canonically in DbD do not even have to physically touch the survivors in order to kill them. In my opinion, the Onryo has a fantastic Mori animation, and also the only animation that has cool sound effects, which gives this Mori a lot of extra points, and I wish all mementos had music or sound effects just to make the impact cooler. Also, notice how she also breaks the bones of the survivors before giving them the iconic Ringu stare. These animations are the perfect combination of iconic, creepy, and brutal. And just like the Cenobite or the Onryo, the Lich is so powerful that he doesn't even have to touch the survivors at any point in this animation, and instead he lets the skeletons do the job. However, the way the survivors die in this Mori is actually extremely brutal and something I am sure many players didn't expect out of this character that doesn't come out of a horror-focused license. When you consider how cool magic killers are in DbD, it's really sad that Freddy Krueger got such a bad Mori animations since he could also do stuff like Vecna does. For all players that complained about the classy Mori of the Dark Lord, worry not, because the true Lord compensates for the lack of brutality by giving players one of the craziest Memento Moris out of all in the game. Everything about it is perfect, from the weird veiny creatures biting the survivors down, to the camera angles that make it look so much more cinematic, to the actual end where Dracula holds the survivor's spine, proving that behavior could make the Wraith do what we wanted him to do for ages. And remember that you get this by buying the Rift, so it's insane value for your purchase. Remember what the community wanted when the Legion released? That's what the Knight got, and I love just how Vecna, he lets his guards do the job, each with his own role. The Assassin to lift them up instead of the survivors standing up like Spirit or Skull Merchant, the Jailer to mark them with the hot iron, the Carnifex to give them a brutal hit so they stand on their knees, and the Knight actually finishing them off, and I don't mean it that way. It's a cinematic masterpiece, and honestly I find it hard to think of another animation that could beat this Memento in case they make a Memento Mori cosmetic store. And as expected, we have the king of Memento Mori animations, the Ghostface, with one of the most photobombed animations in the entire game. It's perfect, to the point I would not use any other animation for this killer unless it also comes with a moment where he takes a picture. It's funny, which is fitting for this license's more comedic tone, it's brutal, because it fits the character's lore as a photographer, and it's also perfect to take an in-game screenshot and add it to the collection. Anyways, remember that this is my subjective opinion. What do you personally think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.